This is 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy and climate challenge in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. About a year ago, in April of 2023, California restructured the tariffs that govern new solar installations in the state. The Net Energy Metering Tariff, known as NEM 3.0, substantially reduces the amount of compensation homeowners get for selling solar power back to the grid, while encouraging investment into additional assets like battery storage or into underserved, disadvantaged communities. The California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, argued the changes were needed for grid reliability purposes, while solar advocates argued that the lower net metering rate threatened the nation's largest rooftop solar market. 1 year later, and we have a bit of perspective in how NEM 3.0 is going. I reached out to Stephanie Doyle, the California State Affairs Director for the Solar Energy Industries Association, to help me walk through what's happening in California's solar market. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about how long I lasted during summer vacation before starting to count down the minutes until school starts again. Let's get it on. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, as I mentioned before, when Stephanie and I were talking a little bit off pod, this is not an area that I would necessarily claim myself to be an expert in. So I'm looking forward to you educating not only my audience, but me personally around what's happening in the California solar market, such an important solar market here in the U.S. And maybe we can start with an introduction to yourself, to SEIA, and your role within the California advocacy ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about net metering and the California rooftop kind of situation that we're in now. So SEIA is the National Trade Association for the solar and storage industry. We represent over 1,200 companies from utility scale to rooftop solar and really everything in between, including recycling, batteries, manufacturing. And SEIA works at the policy level, both state and federal, to encourage solar policy that grows the industry and can really help the U.S. reach its climate and clean energy goals. And I am our State Affairs Director for California, which means I oversee our legislative and regulatory work within the state. I represent our many companies that operate nationwide, but particularly in California, when talking with elected officials, policymakers, the press, or just, really anyone who's interested in our work and why solar is such an important part of the California energy mix. Before SEIA, I worked at Vote Solar, which is an organization that works on equitable clean energy policy throughout the country. I focused on California. And before that, spent a lot of time at the federal level in DC working on climate and energy issues in various government affairs roles at some environmental organizations.
Well, I'm looking forward to tapping into your expertise, Stephanie. It sounds perfect for this topic of today. Let's start by laying a foundation and some definition definition setting, if you will, of what we're going to talk about. Let's start with why California is so important within the solar industry.
Yeah. California has, I think, fairly well known, has always been the state kind of setting the lead, not just on solar energy, but renewable policy in general. And when it comes to solar energy, in terms of deployment and in terms of the policies that California has put in place to support that deployment and really make it possible to build projects. California is known for its innovation and its risk-taking when it comes to new ideas, especially around clean energy and climate. We've always led the way. And California started that with, we implemented a renewable portfolio standard, which set goals for how much renewable power should make up the energy mix from utilities, which was what led to a lot of the first utility scale projects in the state around 2010. We've since updated that RPS, which now has a goal of 100% carbon-free generation by 2045. California also led the way with policies like the Million Solar Roof Initiative that was started in 2006 with Governor Schwarzenegger. And our utility commission adopted a California solar initiative following that in 2007, which provided the incentives for solar technologies to kind of take off. And that CSI program had both a general market component and a low income component, which has since developed into other programs in the state that helped jumpstart the market and really reduce the cost of solar technology overall for the country, which they've done. And that really led to a big initial uptake of rooftop solar. And then, of course, we got net energy metering, which is the policy that helped California lead the way with solar installments up until around last year, when I think Texas surpassed us. But before that, for the last 30 years, California has led the way in developing and supporting the solar energy economy nationwide.
Yeah, if I'm doing my math correctly, the head start that California has established you as such a predominant player. I think about a quarter of all solar power generated within the U.S. comes from your state,
Yeah, that sounds correct.
which is amazing. But as you kind of hinted to, and we will get back to it, a little turbulence in the solar market over the course of the last year. Let's let's step into that, but let's do that cautiously and maybe define net metering first so that the audience can at least get a foundation as to what it is and why it's important for the establishment of a solar industry in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So net metering is a billing mechanism that credits solar energy system owners for the electricity that they send back to the grid. For example, if you are a residential customer and you have a solar system on your roof, it may generate more electricity than the home uses during the day. And if that home is net metered, the electricity meter will basically run backwards to provide a credit against the electricity that's consumed at night or at other periods when your home system use is exceeding that system output. So customers are only billed for their net energy use, which is where you get the name. And on average, only 20 to 40% of a solar energy system's output ever goes back to the grid. And that exported solar electricity serves nearby loads. So like your neighbor will, potentially get some of your electricity. And the reason that net metering is such an important policy for growing rooftop solar, particularly in places where solar is just starting or it's just beginning to take off, is it helps to offset the cost of a system so that when you are a homeowner and you're trying to do the math to figure out, should I get a system? Should I buy it outright? Should I invest in one? The ability to be paid for the power that you're returning to the grid can help offset some of those costs and reduce the payback time of that investment, basically. And then I think it's also important to just note that, it's also important for customers to be able to choose their own personal portfolio of their energy mix. And so it gives a homeowner a bit of autonomy of, I want to produce clean energy and I want to produce it myself versus using a utility.
So most net metering tariffs are set up as kind of a one-to-one against the retail rate. Whatever you end up paying for electricity, you get credited back for the electricity you provide back to the grid. NEM 3.0 goes in a slightly different direction, and maybe this is where the controversy started. Stephanie, give us a perspective as how NEM 3.0 evolved and what is different about that metering tariff.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, NEM has really been a pivotal policy, particularly in places where rooftop solar was, they needed the incentive to kind of boost the market and to get people to invest in it. So in California, we had NEM 1.0 was around from the late 1990s through 2016. And it really helped to grow our rooftop solar. Like you mentioned, in California, we have the most in the country. Following that, we had an update in 2016 where we got NEM 2.0, and that incorporated some changes like requiring NEM customers to go on specific time of use rates and to pay some extra non-bypassable charges. So those changes were smaller. And then this most recent change to NEM 3.0, or what it's technically called, which is the Net Billing Tariff. So you'll hear both used, NBT, NEM 3.0. They're the same thing. So the Net Billing Tariff went into effect in April 2023, like you mentioned, and it made changes to the way that those households are compensated for their exports. So as you mentioned, rather than being compensated at that full retail one-for-one rate for their net exports, customers under this new NBT are compensated at the utility's avoided cost for purchasing a comparable amount of electricity. And the way that they figure that out is the commission came up with a new tool called the avoided cost calculator that derives a separate avoided cost for each hour of the day. So if you're exporting during the middle of the day, when every other system is also exporting, and the amount of solar output is really high, you'll be compensated less than later in the day or the evening because your solar is worth less at that time of the day. And the use of the avoided cost was seen as a way to encourage the installation of battery storage systems alongside solar because it allows you to change when you're exporting. You can store it during the day and then export it in the evening when it's more valuable. And the idea, again, of this new net billing tariff was to send customers the appropriate price signal to export during those specific times that the commission saw as really important. And because of the enormous success of those earlier NEM iterations over the years, there was a great deal of energy being exported during the middle of the day when it wasn't as valuable. And so California needs more battery systems to be installed alongside the solar, again, to allow it to dispatch during the energy peak, which tends to be in the mid-afternoon to evening rather than the middle of the day. So those changes to NEM do make things a lot more complicated than using traditional NEM, where you get paid at retail rates. It's 1-for-1. It's fairly straightforward to understand. Under NBT, it's pretty hard to explain to an average person. Like, I work in the energy industry, and even I find it hard to figure out, what all of these different times and values are. And additionally, because you need a battery to really get the full benefit under this tariff, it increases the cost of going solar because you now have to account for not just buying your solar panels, you also have to buy a battery system. And at the same time, you're getting paid less for your exports. So it's more complicated. It makes it slightly more expensive, and you're getting paid less, which is why the controversy came about.
Yeah, it definitely sounds as though it's a structure and a system, a framework to help around grid reliability. I'll direct some of my audience back to a session I did around the duck curve in California and how so much solar generation is occurring in the middle of the day to the point where what you really want to do is curtail some of that and shift that power towards the evening hours when the sun goes down and people are coming home from work and turning on TVs to watch the Boston Celtics beat the Dallas Mavericks. So, these are the things that you can sense about the reliability concerns that the CPUC is trying to address here by shifting more investment towards batteries. But it does raise the cost. Like, it seems as though you made solar more difficult to access for the common resident. I mean, it's a year into this program. Is that what we're seeing? Has this affected solar installations? To your point about having the capital cost go up and the return on investment coming down?
Yeah, we've definitely seen impacts from it. SEIA works with Wood Mackenzie, who does solar stats, predictions, and projections. So in Q1 of 2024, California dropped to third among states for new solar capacity additions from second in 2023. And residential solar installations are forecast to fall by another 40% compared to 2023.
Wow.
Which is a more drastic drop than the 2% contraction we're planning to see in other states. And in total, the state solar market is expected to decline by 34% across all market segments in 2024. I will say that that's not all due to NEM. There's been a lot of other policy decisions in California that are impacting that, but the new NBT does and will have significant impact on rooftop solar deployment numbers, which we'll continue to see. And, we've seen it also in job numbers for the companies that do the installations for those.
I can imagine that this has been kind of a real tsunami of effect on the solar industry. As you mentioned, from a job perspective, from an installation perspective, how has the solar industry reacted to NEM 3.0? And then I'll follow that up with a question around how the utility and power grid perspective has reacted too, and maybe we can get both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, I won't speak for the utilities, but I can try to, give a little insight from my perspective. But yeah, I think, a lot of the concern from the industry side initially when NBT was rolled out was around how the industry would continue to grow and expand under these pretty big changes that happened fairly quickly. I think, policy changes happen, but it's kind of the pace at which you do that, and allowing industry to adjust to changes. So like I mentioned before, it's a hard policy to explain. The ACC, that weighted cost calculator, has 8,760 different values, one for each hour of the year. They also vary by region.
By utility, by like I can imagine it's just a complex web of interlocking,
Yeah,
confusing numbers that is probably difficult to model out what your actual return is going to be.
exactly. Exactly. And so if you're someone selling solar, you want to be able to accurately help someone understand and know, this is how much you're going to save over the year. And it's just a lot harder to do that. Not to say that companies won't be able to do that eventually, but it's just a really abrupt change, to ask people to make. And then in addition, there was also a lot of concern around batteries and how readily available the supply chain was for the amount of batteries that this program was going to be encouraging. A lot of bigger solar companies had already established a lot of connections and supply chains for batteries. They were already doing that, but a lot of smaller companies, it's a lot harder to get access to those. Um, and and then just in general, there was a lot of concern, not just from the solar industry, but from environmental advocates and plenty of elected officials around how this change would slow down the progress that we've made in California on rooftop solar deployment. In California, we have a mandate now for all new buildings and homes to have solar, and changing the rules to make it more expensive for the solar would also mean you're looking at increased housing costs, which is a huge deal in California already. I can tell you, housing is, crazy here. And so there was just a lot of ripple effects that people have been worried about would come from this policy change. As far as the utility perspective, they were fairly in support of the changes for the most part.
Mhm.
The incentive here in California for an investor-owned utility is, they sell you energy, they build energy infrastructure. And so if more people are generating their own energy, it cuts into their ability to ask for more revenue. They're just building less infrastructure. So they were generally less concerned with the changes to the policy itself and more concerned with implementation and, needing to update their billing system, and that was going to make things more complicated and harder to do. But they were more in support of the policy changes.
All right, so you teed up a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask you there, Stephanie. Okay, and I'm going to go in something of an order in terms of how you laid them out. But you mentioned the abruptness of the net billing tariff and how the industry didn't really have a lot of time to adapt and adjust to it. As I understand it, there were some initial, suggestions around putting in some glide paths and some longer lead times to adjust to this. Why is it that the CPUC, if you know, why is it that the CPUC decided not to adopt some of those glide path proposals?
Yeah. Again, I can't speak specifically to why, but they didn't end up going with the glide paths offered by the parties in the proceeding. They did end up adopting what they considered their own version of a glide path, which was part of the tariff has these adders. So they're like additional compensation on top of the tariff for customers for the first few years. And there are higher adders for low income households, that extend a little bit further out on the timeline. So that was their way of doing a glide path, was like, we'll give these adders for, I believe it's like the first 9 years, I want to say, to help people adjust, but those are going to fade out. So they did do what they considered their own version of it. It wasn't what the industry wanted to see. We wanted it sort of phased in over time. But I do think it's smart that they did the low income adders. That definitely is getting at that equity question of how do you ensure that we're continuing to grow the market specifically for those who haven't had access to rooftop solar before.
Well, that was going to be part of my next series of questions around the increased cost of these systems. It seems as though you're making it even more disadvantaged for low income customers to actually participate. How have those adders helped in terms of adoption by low income customers? Now, I'm gonna preface this with the fact that the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory released a report kind of outlining kind of a retrospective, if you will, of the previous year in terms of what happened within California. Um, Give me some perspective as to how LBNL is thinking about low income adoption and maybe what you've seen in terms of low income customers and how they're thinking about solar now.
Yeah. Yeah. The LBNL study, I think, is really helpful. It did, like you said, it sort of took the data from the first year and tried to really give a non-biased, accurate portrait of what we're dealing with. And we can talk, more broadly about the general market in there too. But yeah, the shift to more low and moderate income homes getting rooftop solar to me was really interesting and encouraging. And I think at least on the SEIA side, we're still digging into the reasons behind that. And I think it'll probably take a while to figure that out specifically. But LBNL gave a few reasons, one of which was that new home mandate that I mentioned requires new homes to have solar. And LBNL basically said that the NBT installs are more likely to be heavily skewed toward new home construction. And those zip codes tend to be in low to moderate income areas, which is partially why you're seeing that uptick. But they also talk about there are various incentives for low and moderate income households, both at the state and the federal level now, that could also be contributing to that higher adoption. So there's, like I mentioned, there's additional adders for NBT. So if you're a company, you might be more inclined to go sell to low to moderate income household because you know that they're going to get a better deal with those adders. As well as there are new bonus federal tax credits for systems that are installed in low income neighborhoods, disadvantaged communities. And then California just has a lot of really great state incentive programs, such as DAC/SASH. We have one called SGIP that help buy down the upfront cost of solar and storage systems for low income customers. Some of those are unfortunately facing some budget cuts now at the legislature, but in general, those programs help offset those upfront costs. And so it's probably a combination of all of those things. But like I said, I think it'll take some time to kind of figure that out.
So it sounds as though the LMI adoption has increased for a number of different reasons, and it's probably going to take some forensic analysis to get into the whys and wheres and whats about how it has achieved that, with a stronger decrease on the established residential market.
Yeah.
You brought it up before that there's some concern as to whether California can meet their ambitious climate goals with such a drop in solar installations. How is that discussed, and how is that being discussed in the after effects of the net billing tariff?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to our climate targets in California, we have really ambitious goals. And when it comes to what the effect of this is going to be, again, I think we're going to have to wait and see. Again, it's been a year, but I will say it definitely makes it harder when you have a tool removed from your toolbox when we're trying to reach these really ambitious goals and you're tying one hand behind your back, whatever metaphor you want to use. We know we need all types of solar to be able to reach our goals, and relying on only utility scale or only on rooftop solar, it's just not going to work, particularly in a state like California. So making it harder for people to get rooftop solar, making it more expensive, is just going to make those goals harder as well. Our California Energy Commission right now is calling for 28.2 gigawatts of rooftop solar by 2045. So we still have a long way to go.
Could you give me a perspective as to where you are right now?
Yeah, we're at 16.5 gigawatts.
Okay. So I'm gonna make really bad math and say you're gonna double it.
Yeah, which is doable, but obviously, when you're making policy changes that are disincentivizing it, getting rooftop solar, you're just making it harder at a time when we really need to be making it easier, not harder.
Fair enough. Now, part of the impetus of NEM 3.0, though, was to kind of shift some of the investment towards batteries and towards storage to the point where those solar panels that are generating power during the day are more valuable overall for California. Has that happened, or are we seeing the increased costs, be such to the point where people aren't even investing in batteries?
Yeah, so that LBNL study provided some good numbers. Um, I think it's important to call out that it really does show a pretty drastic drop off in solar installations in general under this new policy. According to LBNL, I think it said about 50,000 systems have been interconnected under the new NBT structure, in addition to 200,000 people that got in under the NEM 2.0 before it switched over the same time period. But they also included data from Energy Sage, which is a platform that provides quotes for people that are interested in going solar. And Energy Sage has seen a huge downturn since the NBT went into effect, which just means people aren't even looking for quotes, let alone actually going through with getting projects. That being said, like you mentioned, the number of solar that is being installed with battery attachment has gone way up to about 60%. So that is a really good thing. And that is, what the commission was trying to do under NBT. I would also mention, though, that there is a bit of like a wonky implementation issue that SEIA has been working on since NBT went into effect. It's a little confusing, but it has to do with the way that export credits are valued back on a customer's bill. And we're concerned that that may mess up the price signal that the commission was intending, and encourage people to self-consume rather than export, which would kind of defeat the whole purpose. So,
Self-consume from a battery or from the solar array completely?
yeah, both.
Okay.
Yeah, instead of exporting, you're just going to self-consume.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot of what the commission was intending to do is happening. But at least from SEIA's perspective, we're really trying to focus on addressing a lot of these implementation issues and how this gets rolled out, and making sure that the outcome from NBT is less bad, basically. There's a lot of other kind of smaller decisions that came out of NBT that have to do with like virtual net metering, which is net metering for apartments and multifamily housing that was also cut pretty drastically under this, which we think goes against the commission's intention to expand access and enable more low income and renters and folks who can't get it. So there's just a lot of fallout from it that I still think and know that SEIA is going to work to address. And so, yeah, we'll have to see kind of how things play out.
So lots to unpack around this, the repercussions of net billing tariff. It sounds as though, from the outside looking in, that the solar energy that was being generated wasn't as valuable during the time of the day that it was being generated in. The CPUC was trying to figure out some way to shift that with the installation of more batteries and storage and being able to use that. It seems like this is going to be a tough hill to climb to get to the California Energy Commission's goal of 28.2 gigawatts of installed capacity of solar. But you have to make certain that solar is valuable as well, and that it's not just simply being curtailed in some fashion. Having solar that's not actually generating power is not useful to anybody either.
Correct.
It does feel as though there's a balance here to try to figure out, and the implementation efforts to try to get to that point, to bring along low and moderate income customers, to bring along virtual net metering customers who exist in an apartment or a rental space, et cetera. What is SEIA focused on today in terms of how to continue to advance the California solar market under this new environment?
Yeah, I think as far as the industry moving forward, any industry, particularly the solar industry, needs certainty and needs continued support from legislators and regulators so that we can predictably plan and continue to grow and expand access for households and businesses that do want to continue to go solar. Acknowledging that changes in policy, they happen, they're never easy, and they're always going to take time to adjust. But making sure, as I mentioned, that the implementation of those policies is done correctly and clearly and in a way that companies and customers can understand, I think is one area that SEIA is really leaning into now to ensure that we can move forward under this new regime in a way that doesn't cause more harm or confusion for customers and businesses, and doesn't restrict our ability to reach our climate goals. We also really believe we should be looking at other policies to support distributed generation and rooftop solar, like virtual power plants, dynamic pricing, and different types of rates, so that both people who want to go solar and people who already have solar and battery systems can actively participate in our energy system in a way that really helps the grid and lowers their bills at the same time. I think that's really important for us going forward, is what are those new policies in addition to net metering that we can rely on to really make sure distributed generation still has a place in California's policy mix.
Yeah, so net metering has shifted a little bit, but there are other ways for us to reach both the economic benefit as well as the value, the reliability, resiliency, and climate value of solar, of distributed assets in general. All right, Stephanie, as we wrap up the conversation and thinking about the audience and this deluge of information from the net billing tariff, what are the three things that we should be taking away in terms of the California solar market, what's next, and SEIA's activation of policy and advocacy in the space?
Yeah. I think what I would like folks to come away with is the rooftop solar industry is going through a rough time right now due to the changes to net billing tariff, and in addition, a lot of other smaller decisions that the commission has made over the last few years. It's kind of been just death by 1,000 cuts. And that is not to say that the industry will not be able to recover. I absolutely think it can. It's an innovative and incredible industry that I'm so lucky to work in. But SEIA is really working to ensure that policies from the legislature and the California Public Utility Commission are better aligned to support distributed generation as we go forward. We really need to ensure that our elected officials, our appointed officials are all working in the same direction that we want to be getting to for our climate goals. I would also say that the California rooftop solar industry and distributed generation in general, particularly when, with batteries, we can offer a really dynamic grid that can bring down costs and help achieve our climate goals if our incentives for the investor-owned utilities are better aligned with the outcomes that we want to see. We really need to think about how the utilities incentives are in place and ways to change those to enable our goals to really be achievable. And then finally, I would just say, California can't achieve our climate and clean energy goals with one type of solar or one type of renewable energy alone. We really need a mix of utility scale, community scale, rooftop, in order to successfully and affordably meet our California energy needs. And reducing or eliminating or making things more expensive for any of those is really just going to make our efforts harder overall and make energy more expensive. It just adds a layer of complication that we really don't need. So we really want to see a robust mix of solar types and a robust mix of policies that encourage the deployment of all of those.
Sounds like a second conversation to have around the differing types of solar out there and how those are being implemented in California as well. California has always been a leader in the space. It's been a leader in the renewable energy space in general, but certainly, a quarter of all solar power being generated in the U.S. coming from California. We're looking to you as a state in terms of trying to figure out how exactly to navigate some of these challenges around the energy transition moving forward. All right, it's not easy. It's difficult. It's challenging. I don't think anybody has stumbled upon the right answer yet. But to your earlier point, we're continuing to push and prod and see what we can do in terms of getting the most value out of it. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Really appreciated this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really fun. I could talk for another hour, so thank you for keeping me succinct.
We could have covered a whole bunch of different topics and conversations, but I will direct the audience that if they have further questions, to reach out to SEIA and see what you may be able to help them with.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you for joining 8 Minutes.